I never thought my heated driveway would become the centerpiece of a lawsuit. But here I was, standing in my kitchen at 6 in the morning, watching through the window as the HOA president lay sprawling across my driveway like a starfish on ice. My name is Jeremy Jacobson, and I had just moved to Meadowbrook Heights in Boulder, Colorado, 3 months prior. The neighborhood was one of those pristine suburban developments where every lawn looked like it belonged in a magazine. Every house was painted in approved earth tones, and every mailbox stood at exactly the regulation height. I should have known what I was getting into when the realtor spent 20 minutes explaining the HOA rules before even showing me the master bedroom. The house itself was perfect. A modern craftsman with large windows, an open floor plan, and most importantly, a heated driveway. Being originally from Phoenix, I had never owned a heated driveway before, but the moment the previous owner demonstrated it during my walkthrough, I was sold. Colorado winters could dump feet of snow overnight, and the idea of never having to shovel again was worth every penny of the premium I paid for the house. The system was sophisticated. Radiant heating tubes ran beneath the concrete, connected to the house's boiler system. A dedicated breaker in my garage controlled the whole setup, and sensors automatically activated the heating when temperatures dropped and moisture was detected. It was brilliant engineering, and it worked flawlessly through November and December. Then, I met Brenda. Brenda Patterson was the HOA president, a title she wore like a military rank. She was 52 years old with a blonde bob that never moved, even in wind, and she had a way of looking at you that made you feel like you had just tracked mud through her personal living room. She drove a white Lexus SUV that was always spotless, wore pastel blazers over matching shell tops, and carried a leather-bound copy of the HOA bylaws everywhere she went like it was scripture. Our first interaction happened in early January. I was checking my mail when she pulled up beside me, her window already descending before her car had fully stopped. "You must be the new owner of 847 Pinecrest Drive," she said. It was not a question. "That's right, Jeremy Jacobson." I extended my hand through her window. She looked at my hand like it might be contaminated, then briefly shook it with 2 fingers. "Brenda Patterson, HOA president, I need to discuss some concerns with your property." I had not been aware there were any concerns. "Sure, what's going on?" "Your holiday lights were not removed by January 5th, which is 3 days past the approved takedown date. Additionally, your recycling bin was visible from the street on a non-collection day last Tuesday." I blinked. My recycling bin. Section 12. Paragraph 4 of our community guidelines states that all trash and recycling receptacles must be stored out of view, except on designated collection days, and only between the hours of 6 a.m. and 8 p.m. on those days. I must have forgotten to bring it back in. "I'll grab it right after I get the mail. See that you do. First impressions matter in this community, Mr. Jacobson. We maintain property values through consistent adherence to standards." She started rolling up her window, then paused. "Oh, and I will need to schedule a property inspection for next week. Standard procedure for new homeowners." Before I could respond, she had driven off, leaving me standing at my mailbox wondering what I had gotten myself into. The property inspection happened the following Thursday. Brenda arrived with 2 other board members. Margaret Chen, a retired accountant who never smiled, and Robert Franklin, a quiet man who seemed uncomfortable with the whole proceedings but dutifully took notes on a clipboard. They walked through my front yard with measuring tools, took photos of my house from multiple angles, and spent an unusual amount of time examining my driveway. "What's this?" Brenda asked, pointing at the small sensor box mounted near my garage. That's the sensor for my heated driveway system." Her eyebrows rose. "Heated driveway?" "Yeah, the previous owner had it installed. It is amazing. During that snowstorm last week, I did not have to lift a shovel once." Brenda exchanged glances with Margaret. "I will need to review whether this installation was properly approved by the Architectural Review Committee. It was installed by the previous owner like 5 years ago. I am sure it was approved back then. Nevertheless, I will need to verify compliance." She made a note in her bylaws book. "The system uses electricity, I assume." "It is connected to my boiler, so it uses natural gas and electricity, yes." Another note. "I see." They finished their inspection without finding any other issues, though Brenda made a point of measuring the height of my lawn gnome that my sister had given me as a housewarming gift. Apparently, decorative items could not exceed 18 inches in height. The gnome was 19 inches. I put it in my backyard that afternoon. 2 weeks passed quietly. I thought maybe the inspection had satisfied whatever bureaucratic urge drove Brenda's oversight. I was wrong. On a Tuesday evening in late January, I came home from work to find a letter taped to my front door. The envelope was cream-colored with the HOA logo, embossed in gold. Inside was a 2-page letter informing me that my heated driveway system was in violation of community guidelines. The letter claimed that the system constituted an unapproved external modification, and that its operation during snowfall created an aesthetic inconsistency, because my driveway remained clear while my neighbors' driveways were snow-covered. This allegedly violated Section 8, Paragraph 12 of the Community Guidelines, which stated that all properties shall maintain visual harmony with surrounding residences. I read the letter 3 times, certain I was misunderstanding something. They were telling me I could not use my heated driveway because it worked too well and made my neighbors' driveways look bad by comparison. I called the HOA office the next morning. A bored-sounding administrator named Kelly answered. "Hi, I received a letter about my heated driveway and I think there might be some confusion. Let me transfer you to Brenda." "Actually, I was hoping you could just clarify something in the guidelines because I think click, hold music." 2 minutes later. "This is Brenda Patterson." "Hi, Brenda. This is Jeremy Jacobson at 847 Pinecrest. I got your letter about my heated driveway, and I am confused because the system was already installed when I bought the house. Previous violations do not excuse current violations, Mr. Jacobson. But it is not a violation. The previous owner got it approved. I have the permits in my house files. Permits from the county are not the same as HOA architectural approval. Okay, then I would like to apply for architectural approval now. The review committee meets once per quarter. The next meeting is in April. That is 3 months away. What am I supposed to do until then? Refrain from using the system until you receive approval. I felt my jaw clench. Brenda, with all due respect, that makes no sense. It is January in Colorado. We have gotten 14 inches of snow in the last week alone. You want me to just let my driveway become an ice rink? You can shovel like everyone else in the community, Mr. Jacobson. Many homeowners find it to be excellent exercise. The whole point of the heated driveway is that I do not have to shovel. Many people want many things that are not in compliance with community standards. This is not a negotiation. Cease using the system until you receive proper approval, or the HOA will be forced to take action. Good day." She hung up. I spent the next hour researching Colorado HOA laws. What I found was not encouraging. While HOAs could not prevent you from doing things explicitly protected by state law, they had broad authority over aesthetic and architectural matters. However, They also could not retroactively enforce rules against improvements made before a homeowner purchased a property. And they could not create arbitrary rules that served no legitimate community purpose. I drafted a formal response letter citing these legal principles and requesting documentation of when this particular interpretation of the visual harmony clause had been adopted. I sent it certified mail. Brenda responded 4 days later with a letter that did not address any of my legal arguments, but simply reiterated that I must cease using the system, and included a notice that I was being fined $200 for continued violation of community standards. That was when I hired a lawyer. David Martinez was a real estate attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. His office was in downtown Boulder, in a modern building with views of the Flatirons. He listened to my story while reviewing copies of all my correspondence with Brenda. "This is ridiculous," he said, not looking up from the papers. "Even for an overzealous HOA president, this is absurd. So I can fight it." "Absolutely. The heated driveway was disclosed in your sale documents, which means it was part of the property's existing condition when you purchased. They cannot retroactively require approval for something that was already there. Plus, this interpretation of the visual harmony clause is incredibly weak. No court would uphold a rule that says your property must be covered in snow because your neighbor's properties are. What do I need to do?" First, stop paying any fines related to this issue. Do not give them a penny because paying could be construed as accepting the violation. Second, continue using your driveway normally. Document everything with photos and timestamps. Third, let me draft a letter explaining why their position is legally indefensible. Most HOAs back down once an attorney gets involved. And if they do not back down, then we file suit and you will probably win. But honestly, I doubt it will come to that. This Brenda person is probably just used to bullying homeowners who do not know their rights. David's letter went out the next day. It was 5 pages of legal arguments, case citations, and pointed questions about the HOA's authority to enforce this particular interpretation of their guidelines. It concluded by demanding that all fines be rescinded, and that the HOA provide written confirmation that I could use my heated driveway without restriction. Brenda's response arrived within 48 hours. She rejected every argument, doubled my fines to $400, and added a new claim that my heated driveway was causing my water runoff to create ice patches on the street, which was apparently a safety hazard under Section 19, Paragraph 7. I took photos of my driveway and the street. There was no ice. The driveway sloped away from the street toward my garage, so any melted snow drained into my yard, not onto the road. The new claim was completely fabricated. David called me after receiving a copy of Brenda's response. "Okay, she's doubling down. This is now officially unhinged. I think she's personally offended that you pushed back. So what now? Now I draft a lawsuit. We will sue the HOA for harassment, improper enforcement of guidelines, and attorney's fees. We will also file for an injunction preventing them from fining you or taking any action regarding the driveway while the case is pending. How long will this take? Could be anywhere from 6 months to a year, depending on the court's schedule and whether they try to drag it out. And it is worth it. I mean, we are talking about a driveway. Jeremy, this is not really about the driveway. This is about whether an HOA president can just make up rules to harass homeowners she does not like. If you let her win, she will keep doing this to other people. Plus, you will probably get your attorney's fees back when you win, so it will not cost you anything except time and aggravation. All right, let us do it." The lawsuit was filed on February 14th. Valentine's Day felt like an appropriate date to tell the HOA I was not going to be their punching bag. Brenda's reaction was swift and petty. Within a week, I received violation notices for my grass being 1/4 of an inch too tall. It was February in Colorado. Nothing was growing. She had literally gone into my yard with a ruler to measure dormant winter grass. My mailbox being oxidized and needing to be repainted. There were 3 tiny spots where the black paint had worn away. You could only see them if you were looking for them. Parking my car on the street overnight, which was apparently prohibited between November and March unless you obtained a special permit. I had parked on the street exactly once when my garage door opener broke, and I was waiting for the repair company the next morning. Each violation came with a $200 fine. David collected all the notices and added them to our lawsuit as evidence of retaliatory harassment. The pattern was so obvious that even Brenda's own HOA attorney, when they finally retained one, advised her in writing to stop issuing violations to me. I knew this because David obtained the letter during discovery. Meanwhile, it was now late February, and Colorado was in the middle of one of its snowiest winters in recent memory. Every few days, another storm would roll through, dumping anywhere from 4 to 10 inches of fresh powder. My heated driveway performed flawlessly. My neighbors, meanwhile, were constantly shoveling. Some of them started to notice. Todd Hendricks, who lived 2 houses down, stopped by one evening while I was checking my mail. "Hey man, I have been meaning to ask you about your driveway. How does it stay so clear? It is heated." Radiant heating system under the concrete. His eyes widened. "That is amazing. Did you install it yourself?" "No, the previous owner had it done. It has been great, honestly. I have not touched a shovel since I moved in." "I bet. Does it cost a lot to run?" "Not really. Maybe an extra $30 a month on the gas bill. Totally worth it." "Man, I might look into getting one. I threw out my back last week shoveling that heavy wet snow we got." I hesitated, then decided to be honest. "Fair warning, the HOA is giving me grief about it. They claim it is a violation because my driveway looks too good compared to everyone else's." Todd stared at me. "You are joking." "I wish. I've got a lawyer and everything." "That is insane. It was already there when you moved in, right?" "Yep. They do not care." Todd shook his head. "Brenda is out of control. She tried to fine me last year because she said my front door wreath was too large. It was literally the same size as 3 other wreaths on the street, but those belonged to her friends, so they were fine. I had to threaten to run for the board before she backed off." Over the following weeks, I heard similar stories from other neighbors. Brenda had apparently been running the HOA like a personal fiefdom for 6 years, selectively enforcing rules against people she did not like while ignoring violations by her allies. The community was full of people who resented her, but felt powerless to do anything about it. This gave me an idea. The HOA bylaws stated that any board member could be removed by a vote of the homeowners, but you needed signatures from 20% of the community to trigger a recall election. Meadowbrook Heights had 200 homes, which meant I needed 40 signatures. I spent the next 2 weeks going door to door. I explained what Brenda was doing to me, showed people copies of the ridiculous violation notices, and asked if they would support a recall election. The response was overwhelming. People were not just willing to sign, they were eager. Many shared their own stories of Brenda's petty tyranny. One couple, the Ramirez family, told me about how Brenda had threatened to fine them for displaying a political sign in their window during the last election. The sign said, "Science is real, Black Lives Matter, love is love." Brenda claimed it was political. The Rameyerses pointed out that several homes had actual campaign signs supporting various candidates, which were undeniably political. Brenda said those did not count because they were official campaign materials for local elections. The selective reasoning was maddening. Another neighbor, an elderly man named George Whitman, told me how Brenda had tried to force him to replace his roof because the shingles were weathered. The roof was only 8 years old and in perfect condition. It had just faded slightly from the sun. George was on a fixed income and could not afford a new roof. He eventually had to hire a roofing company to write a letter certifying that the roof was structurally sound and did not need replacement. Brenda accepted the letter but made it clear she was unhappy about it. Within 10 days, I had 53 signatures. I submitted them to the HOA office with a formal request for a recall election under the bylaws. Brenda's response was to call an emergency board meeting to address false accusations and community division. The meeting was scheduled for March 15th at 7 p.m. in the community clubhouse. David advised me to attend but to stay calm no matter what Brenda said. She's going to try to make you look like the bad guy. Let her talk. Let her show everyone who she really is. The clubhouse was packed. I had never seen so many neighbors in one place. The room held about 70 people, and every chair was filled with more people standing along the walls. The energy was tense. Brenda sat at a table at the front of the room with Margaret and Robert, the other board members. She had a microphone, which seemed unnecessary given the size of the room, but I suspected she liked the authority it implied. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice echoing slightly. "I have called this meeting to address some unfortunate developments in our community. As many of you know, one of our newer residents has been deliberately violating community guidelines and has now launched a campaign to undermine the leadership of this HOA. I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. Mr. Jacobson moved to Meadowbrook Heights just a few months ago," Brenda continued, "and almost immediately began disregarding the rules that the rest of us follow. He has refused to comply with guidelines regarding his property, has hired an attorney to sue our community, and is now attempting to remove me as president because I dared to enforce the standards we all agreed to when we purchased our homes here." A hand went up. It was Todd Hendricks. "Yes, Todd," Brenda said, her tone suggesting she knew she was not going to like what came next. "Can you explain exactly what rule Jeremy violated? Because, from what I understand, he has a heated driveway that was already installed when he bought the house." "That does not sound like a violation to me. The driveway creates an aesthetic inconsistency Todd interrupted. "His driveway is clear of snow. That is what driveways are supposed to look like." "Are you seriously saying he is not allowed to remove snow from his own driveway? The method by which he removes the snow was not properly approved through the architectural review process." Another neighbor spoke up, a woman I had not met, but the driveway was already there. "How is he supposed to get retroactive approval for something he did not install? Previous violations do not excuse. It is not a violation." Someone else called out. The room erupted in cross-talk. Multiple people were trying to speak at once, and Brenda kept banging her hand on the table and saying "order, order" into the microphone. Eventually, the room quieted down, but the hostility toward Brenda was palpable. George Whitman stood up slowly, using his cane for support. The room went silent out of respect for his age. "Brenda, I have lived in this community for 12 years, he said, his voice quavering slightly but firm. "I have watched you become more and more unreasonable as president. This business with Jeremy's driveway is just the latest example. You have been using your position to bully people, and I, for one, am tired of it. I signed the recall petition, and I hope everyone else here did too." There was a murmur of agreement from the crowd. Brenda's face had gone red. "Mr. Whitman, with all due respect, you do not understand the complexities of managing a community like this. There are standards that must be maintained." "I understand just fine, thank you. And what I understand is that you have forgotten that you work for us, not the other way around." The crowd applauded. Brenda looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. Robert Franklin, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. "Brenda, maybe we should take a vote on whether the board supports your position on the heated driveway issue." Brenda turned to glare at him. "Excuse me. I have been thinking about this a lot," Robert continued, not meeting her eyes. "And I do not think we have legal ground to stand on here. Jeremy's attorney is right. We cannot retroactively enforce approval requirements on improvements that predated his ownership. I think we should drop this issue and rescind the fines." Margaret Chen nodded slowly. "I agree. This has gone too far." Brenda looked betrayed. "You cannot be serious. We have authority over architectural standards, and we have authority to enforce reasonable rules," Robert said. "This is not reasonable. I move that we vote to rescind all fines against Jeremy Jacobson and acknowledge that his heated driveway is compliant with HOA guidelines." "I second the motion," Margaret said immediately. Brenda looked stunned. "This is ridiculous." "I am the president and I, all in favor," Robert said. Robert and Margaret raised their hands. "Opposed?" Brenda's hand shot up, but she was outvoted 2-1. The room erupted in applause. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was not a complete victory. The recall election would still proceed, and I still had a lawsuit pending, but at least the immediate harassment was over. Brenda stood abruptly, gathering her papers. "This meeting is adjourned." She walked out of the clubhouse without another word, Margaret and Robert scrambling to follow. Several neighbors came up to congratulate me afterward. Todd shook my hand enthusiastically. "That was amazing. I have never seen anyone stand up to her like that." "I could not have done it without everyone signing the petition," I said. "When is the recall election?" "Should be within 30 days, according to the bylaws." "Good. It is time for a change around here." I drove home that night feeling like maybe, just maybe, this nightmare was coming to an end. I was wrong. 2 days later, on March 17th, I woke up at 6 a.m. to a winter storm warning. The forecast called for 8 to 12 inches of snow starting around 7 and continuing through the afternoon. I checked my heated driveway controls to make sure everything was ready, then went to make coffee. At 6:30, I heard a noise outside. I looked out my kitchen window and saw Brenda's white Lexus SUV parked in front of my house. She was walking up my driveway toward my garage. I went to the window for a better view. What was she doing? Brenda tried the side door to my garage. It was locked. She then walked around to where my electrical panel was located, which was on the exterior wall of the garage. The breaker box was locked behind a metal door, but I watched in disbelief as she pulled out a key. Wait, why would she have a key to my breaker box? Then I remembered. The previous owner had been on the HOA board. He probably gave Brenda a key for some reason, and she had never returned it. I watched as Brenda opened the breaker box, examined the breakers, and then deliberately flipped one off. She closed the box, locked it, and walked back toward the street. I ran outside in my slippers and pajamas. "Brenda, what the hell are you doing?" She jumped, startled. "Mr. Jacobson." "I was just performing a routine inspection of community infrastructure." "That is my private electrical panel. You have no right to touch it. As HOA president, I have authority to ensure all electrical installations comply with safety standards." "What did you just turn off?" I believe that breaker was labeled as heating system. Given that the board's decision on Tuesday was premature and not made with full legal consultation, I have taken temporary measures to ensure the non-compliant system remains inactive pending proper review. I could not believe what I was hearing. She had just admitted to trespassing on my property and sabotaging my electrical system. Turn it back on, right now. I am afraid I cannot do that. This is a safety issue. Brenda, turn it back on or I am calling the police. You can call whoever you like. I have done nothing wrong. She started walking toward her car, which was parked on the street about 30 feet from the end of my driveway. Snow had started falling. Light flakes at first, but already beginning to accumulate. I went back inside and called David's office. He was not in yet, but I left an urgent voicemail explaining what had just happened. Then I called the non-emergency police line. The dispatcher listened to my story and said an officer would come by to take a report, but it might be an hour or two due to multiple weather-related calls. I went back to the window. Brenda was standing beside her Lexus, talking on her phone. The snow was falling harder now, and my driveway was beginning to turn white. Brenda finished her call and started walking back toward her car. She had been standing on the street side of her vehicle, and now she had to cross in front of it to get to the driver's side door. She stepped onto my driveway. It happened so fast. One moment she was walking confidently, and the next her feet shot out from under her like she had stepped on a banana peel in a cartoon. She fell hard, landing on her right side with an impact I could hear through the window. She lay there for a moment, not moving. I felt a momentary flash of concern, then remembered that she had just criminally tampered with my property. I went outside again. By the time I reached her, she was trying to sit up and gasping in pain. "Are you okay?" I asked, because despite everything, I was not going to just leave an injured person lying on the ground. "My arm," she managed. "I think it is broken." I could see her right wrist was already swelling and bent at an unnatural angle. "Definitely broken. Do not move. I will call an ambulance." "This is your fault," she yelled, though her voice was strained with pain. "Your driveway is icy. This is exactly the safety hazard I was warning about." I looked at the driveway. She was right that it was icy, but only because she had turned off the heating system. If she had not sabotaged my breaker, the driveway would have been completely clear and she never would have fallen. "Brenda, the driveway is icy because you turned off the heating. This is literally your own fault. You are required to maintain safe conditions." "I will be adding this incident to my report to the board." I called 911. The dispatcher said an ambulance would be there within 10 minutes, which was impressive given the weather. I went inside and got a blanket to put over Brenda while we waited. She did not thank me. The ambulance arrived 9 minutes later. 2 paramedics, a man and a woman, quickly assessed Brenda's condition and determined she had indeed broken her wrist. They also suspected she might have bruised or cracked ribs from how she landed. "What happened?" the male paramedic asked as they carefully moved Brenda onto a backboard. "She slipped on my driveway," I said. "He turned off his heating system to create a hazard," Brenda insisted. The paramedics exchanged confused glances but did not comment. They loaded Brenda into the ambulance and drove off, lights flashing. A police officer arrived about 20 minutes later. Officer Jennifer Paulson was a Boulder PD patrol officer who looked extremely tired, probably from dealing with weather-related incidents all morning. I explained the entire situation. The HOA dispute, Brenda trespassing to access my breaker box, her shutting off my heated driveway, and then slipping on the ice that formed because she had shut off the heating. Officer Paulson took notes, occasionally shaking her head in what seemed like disbelief. "So she had a key to your electrical panel. Apparently, the previous owner gave it to her when he was on the HOA board. She never returned it. And she admitted to you that she shut off the breaker. Yes. She said it was because of the HOA dispute over whether I am allowed to use the heated driveway. But the HOA voted to allow the heated driveway. They voted to rescind the fines, yes. And then she came here and shut it off anyway. Correct. Officer Paulson closed her notebook. Okay, here is what is going to happen. This is clearly criminal trespass and possibly criminal mischief, since she damaged or interfered with your property's functionality. I am going to write a report recommending charges. The district attorney will decide whether to prosecute. What about her claiming that I created a hazardous condition by having an icy driveway? Did she have any legitimate reason to be on your driveway? No. Then she was trespassing. Property owners are not generally liable for injuries to trespassers. Plus, the fact that she caused the hazardous condition herself by shutting off your heating system is going to make any claim against you pretty much impossible. I felt relieved. Thank you. One more thing, that key she used. Do you want to press charges specifically for unauthorized entry using that key? Absolutely. Good. Change your locks and that breaker box lock today if you can. Do not give her any opportunity to do this again. Officer Paulson left, and I immediately called a locksmith. Despite the weather, a guy named Rick said he could come by that afternoon. He changed the lock on the breaker box and made me 3 copies of the new key. I put one in my kitchen, one in my car, and one in my wallet. Then I went out and turned the breaker back on. Within 30 minutes, my driveway was clear again. David called me back around lunchtime. I told him everything that had happened. He was silent for a long moment. She actually trespassed onto your property and sabotaged your electrical system, then slipped and injured herself on the ice that resulted from her sabotage. That is exactly what happened. Jeremy, this is the most open and shut case I have ever seen. She basically handed us a winning lawsuit on a silver platter. The HOA's insurance is going to settle so fast your head will spin. What about criminal charges? That is up to the DA, but Officer Paulson was right. This is clearly criminal trespass at minimum. Given that Brenda accessed your electrical system, they might even charge her with burglary since she entered a secured area with intent to interfere with your property. Burglary. That seems extreme. Maybe, but technically, accessing a locked area without permission with intent to commit a crime inside is burglary in Colorado. The locked breaker box could qualify as a structure or secured area. I am not a criminal attorney, so I do not know if they will go that route, but it is possible. Over the next few days, the story spread through Meadowbrook Heights like wildfire. The version I heard repeated back to me was remarkably accurate, which was unusual for neighborhood gossip. I think people were fact-checking with each other because the truth was too crazy to believe without confirmation. The recall election was held on April 3rd. Brenda, despite being removed from her position by the rest of the board immediately after the incident, still held the official title of president until the election. She lost by a landslide. Out of 147 votes cast, she received 9. Even her closest friends on the board had apparently abandoned her. Todd Hendricks was elected as the new president, which felt right. He had been vocal about reforming the HOA's enforcement practices and making the organization more responsive to homeowners rather than a tool for petty dictatorship. The civil lawsuit was settled in May. The HOA's insurance company agreed to pay my attorney's fees, issue a formal apology, and amend the community guidelines to explicitly state that heated driveways and similar snow removal systems were permitted without requiring architectural approval. They also agreed to refund all the bogus fines Brenda had issued, totaling $1,200. But the real satisfaction came from the criminal case. The Boulder County District Attorney's Office charged Brenda Patterson with criminal trespass and criminal mischief in late April. David had been right that burglary was probably too aggressive, but the two charges they filed were serious enough. The criminal mischief charge was particularly significant because it was a Class 2 misdemeanor, punishable by up to a year in jail and fines. The DA's office argued that Brenda had deliberately interfered with the functioning of my property systems, which met the definition of criminal mischief under Colorado law. Brenda hired a criminal defense attorney, a guy named Richard Slovin, who specialized in white-collar crime. He tried to argue that Brenda had been acting in her capacity as HOA president and had genuinely believed she had authority to access the breaker box for safety inspections. The argument fell apart for several reasons. First, the HOA bylaws did not grant the president authority to enter private property without permission, let alone to access homeowners' electrical systems. Second, Brenda had done this 2 days after the board voted against her position, which showed she was acting outside her authority. Third, and most damningly, Brenda had admitted to Officer Paulson in a follow-up interview that she shut off the breaker specifically to keep me from using the heated driveway, not because of any legitimate safety concern. The case went to trial in July. I was called as a witness and testified about the entire sequence of events. The prosecutor, a sharp young woman named Amanda Chen, walked me through everything methodically, establishing that Brenda had no permission to be on my property, that she had used an unauthorized key to access a locked area, and that she had deliberately disabled my property systems. Brenda's attorney tried to paint me as overly litigious and unwilling to cooperate with reasonable community standards. It did not work. The jury saw through it immediately. The most dramatic moment came when the prosecutor played body camera footage from Officer Paulson's interview with Brenda at the hospital later on the day of the incident. Brenda, apparently still in pain and medicated, had been very forthcoming about her actions. "I shut off his breaker because he would not follow the rules," she said on the video. "Someone had to put a stop to it. He thinks he can just do whatever he wants because he hired some lawyer, but I was not going to let that stand." The prosecutor paused the video. "Mrs. Patterson, did you have permission from Mr. Jacobson to access his electrical panel?" "I did not need permission. I am the HOA president." "But the HOA bylaws do not grant you access to private property, do they? The bylaws give the board authority over community standards." "That is not what I asked. Do the bylaws give you the right to enter private property without permission?" Brenda hesitated. "Not explicitly, but not explicitly or not at all. We have implied authority to enforce compliance by trespassing and disabling private property systems." Brenda's attorney objected at that point, but the damage was done. The jury had heard Brenda admit on video that she deliberately sabotaged my property because I would not comply with rules that even her own board had voted against. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. They found Brenda guilty on both charges. Sentencing was scheduled for August. David warned me that first-time offenders rarely got jail time for misdemeanors, especially middle-aged women with no prior criminal history. He was right. The judge sentenced Brenda to 1-year probation, 100 hours of community service, and ordered her to pay restitution for my legal fees associated with pressing charges, which came to about $8,000. But more importantly, the conviction meant Brenda was permanently barred from serving on the HOA board. The bylaws prohibited anyone with a criminal conviction from holding a leadership position. I saw Brenda one more time after the sentencing. It was early September and I was at the grocery store in Boulder. She was in the checkout line ahead of me. Her wrist was in a brace, still healing from the break. She saw me and her face hardened. For a moment, I thought she might say something, but she just turned away and finished her transaction in silence. I did not feel triumphant watching her leave. Mostly, I just felt tired. The whole ordeal had consumed nearly 8 months of my life, cost me thousands of dollars even with the settlements, and created enormous stress. I had won, yes, but it had not been easy or fun. Still, as I drove home that day and pulled into my perfectly clear, heated driveway, I felt a sense of satisfaction. I had stood up to a bully, protected my rights as a homeowner, and prevented Brenda from doing the same thing to other people in the future. The neighborhood changed after Brenda's removal. Todd proved to be an excellent HOA president. He streamlined the violation process to focus on genuine issues like safety hazards and property neglect, rather than petty enforcement of aesthetic rules. He also created a transparent appeals process so homeowners could challenge violations they felt were unfair. Several other neighbors ended up installing heated driveways the following year. The HOA Architectural Committee, now led by Robert Franklin, approved every application without issue. I stayed in Meadowbrook Heights for 3 more years before taking a job in Seattle and relocating. When I sold the house in 2028, the heated driveway was one of the main selling points. The realtor told me it added at least $20,000 to the sale price. I never spoke to Brenda again, though I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she moved away about a year after her conviction. Apparently, being a convicted criminal who had humiliated herself by slipping on the very driveway she had sabotaged was too much social stigma to bear in a community where everyone knew the story. I kept in touch with Todd and a few other neighbors over the years. Todd told me that under the new leadership, HOA compliance actually improved because people were willing to work with the board instead of seeing them as adversaries. Turns out that respect and reasonableness were more effective enforcement tools than fear and pettiness. Who knew? Looking back on the whole experience, I learned several important lessons about dealing with HOAs and difficult people in general. First, documentation is everything. I kept copies of every letter, every email, every fine notice, and every interaction with Brenda. When it came time to defend myself in court and in HOA meetings, having that paper trail was invaluable. Second, know your rights. Many people cave to HOA demands because they assume the HOA has more authority than it actually does. Taking the time to research Colorado HOA laws and consulting with David gave me the confidence to push back against unreasonable demands. Third, you cannot reason with unreasonable people. I tried multiple times to work things out with Brenda through logical arguments and compromise. It was pointless. She was not interested in fairness or reason. She was interested in control and being right. Some people are like that, and the only way to deal with them is through formal processes and, if necessary, legal action. Fourth, community matters. The recall election succeeded because other neighbors were willing to stand up and say enough was enough. If I had been the only person who thought Brenda was out of control, nothing would have changed. But because I took the time to talk to people and organize, we created collective action that led to real reform. And finally, karma is real, even if it works in weird ways. Brenda literally created the hazard that injured her. She disabled my heated driveway, which caused ice to form, which caused her to fall and break her wrist. If she had just left things alone, none of it would have happened. There is something poetic about that, even if I would not have wished a broken wrist on anyone. These days, I live in Seattle and deal with a much more laid-back HOA that mostly just takes care of the landscaping in common areas and organizes the annual neighborhood barbecue. Every time it snows here, which is rare, I think about my heated driveway in Colorado and smile. I also think about Brenda sometimes, usually when I see news stories about HOA disputes or power tripping board members. I wonder if she learned anything from what happened, or if she just sees herself as a victim of a rebellious homeowner and an unjust legal system. I hope she learned something. I hope she realized that leadership means serving people, not controlling them. I hope she understood that rules exist to create functional communities, not to give petty tyrants a tool for harassment. But honestly, I doubt it. Some people never learn. They go through life convinced they are always right and everyone else is wrong, and no amount of evidence or consequences will change their minds. That is okay, though. I did what I needed to do. I protected my property rights. I stood up for myself and my neighbors, and I ensured that one particular HOA tyrant could not hurt anyone else. And I did it all while enjoying a perfectly clear driveway, even during Colorado's snowiest winter in a decade. The heated driveway worked exactly as designed for the entire time I owned the house. Not once did I have to shovel snow or chip ice. Every storm, every cold snap, every freezing rain event, the system handled it all automatically. It was glorious. More than that, it became a symbol. Not just for me, but for the whole neighborhood. It represented the idea that homeowners have rights, that HOA boards are not dictatorships, and that standing up to bullies is worth the effort. Several neighbors told me over the years that watching me fight, Brenda inspired them to push back against other petty enforcement actions. The culture of the HOA shifted from fear-based compliance to cooperative problem-solving. Property values actually increased during that time, probably because people wanted to live in a community with reasonable governance. Todd served as HOA president for 4 years before stepping down to focus on his business. The person who replaced him, a woman named Sarah Chen who was Margaret's daughter, continued the reforms. By the time I left in 2028, Meadowbrook Heights had become a model for how HOAs should operate. The story also made local news, though I declined to be interviewed. A reporter from the Boulder Daily Camera wrote a piece about HOA overreach using my case as the central example. The article quoted David extensively and included comments from other homeowners about their experiences with Brenda's presidency. It was fair and accurate, which was satisfying. Brenda's criminal conviction was public record, so the article mentioned it. I felt a little bad about that, since it meant her shame was broadcast beyond just our neighborhood, but she had brought it on herself. Actions have consequences, even for HOA presidents who think they are above the rules. One unexpected outcome was that I received several messages from people in other HOAs across Colorado who were dealing with similar situations. They asked for advice, wanted to know what lawyer I used, and generally sought guidance on how to push back against overreaching board members. I always responded with the same basic advice. Document everything, know your rights, consult a lawyer early, and organize your neighbors. Most HOA disputes can be resolved without litigation if you show the board you are serious and well-informed. But if they insist on being unreasonable, do not be afraid to sue. Your home is probably your biggest investment, and it is worth protecting. A few people told me later that my advice helped them successfully resolve their own HOA conflicts. That felt good. Maybe Brenda's harassment of me prevented other homeowners from being harassed by their own petty tyrants. There is something darkly funny about the whole situation when I think about it now, years later. Brenda was so obsessed with my driveway being clear when everyone else's driveways had snow that she sabotaged the heating system. This caused ice to form on my driveway. She then walked across that ice and seriously injured herself, leading to criminal charges, a conviction, forced restitution, and permanent banishment from HOA leadership. If she had just left my driveway alone, absolutely none of that would have happened. She would still be HOA president, still wielding her petty authority, still making people's lives difficult over mailbox heights and lawn ornament sizes. Instead, she is a convicted criminal who had to pay thousands of dollars in legal fees and restitution, spend 100 hours doing community service, and endure the humiliation of being known throughout Boulder County as the HOA president who got arrested for tampering with someone's heated driveway. The universe has a sense of humor sometimes. I drive past Meadowbrook Heights occasionally when I visit Colorado to see friends. The neighborhood looks great. The common areas are well maintained, the houses are all in good shape, and there is a friendly atmosphere that was missing during Brenda's reign of terror. My old house looks good too. The new owners have taken excellent care of it. I can tell they use the heated driveway because even in winter, when I have driven by during snowstorms, their driveway is always clear. I hope they appreciate what that system represents. It is not just about convenience. It is about the right to use your own property as you see fit, as long as you are not harming anyone else. That principle seems obvious, but it is surprising how often it needs to be defended against people who think rules and power give them the right to control others. I am glad I fought back. I am glad I spent the time and money and effort to stand up to Brenda. Not just for myself, but for everyone else in Meadowbrook Heights who benefited from her removal and from the reforms that followed. Sometimes doing the right thing is expensive and exhausting and takes months of your life. Sometimes it means going to court, hiring lawyers, organizing recall petitions, and enduring harassment from someone who has nothing better to do than make your life difficult. But it is still worth it, because at the end of the day I won. The good guys won. The reasonable people who just wanted to live their lives in peace and use their heated driveways without harassment won. And Brenda, the HOA Karen who thought she could turn off my breaker and get away with it, learned a very painful and expensive lesson about the limits of her authority. She slipped on the ice that she created in every sense of those words, and that, I think, is justice.